Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into a story of courage, struggle, and monumental change. We're going to explore how the feminist movement completely reshaped the landscape of women's rights in America. This isn't just a history lesson, it's the story of how millions of women fought for the freedoms we often take for granted today. Our story begins long before the term feminism was common. Let's rewind to the 19th century. Picture a world where a woman's identity was almost entirely defined by her husband or father. Women couldn't own property in their own name, they couldn't sign contracts, and the idea of them voting was considered absurd. But dissatisfaction was brewing. This brings us to the first wave of feminism, which kicked off in the mid-1800s. The Seneca Falls Convention of 1848 is often cited as the official start. Imagine this: a group of bold women and some male allies, led by figures like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, gathered to draft the Declaration of Sentiments. It was a radical document for its time, modeled on the Declaration of Independence. But it declared that all men and women are created equal. Their primary goal was suffrage, the right to vote. They believed that without a voice in politics, women would never achieve true equality. For over 70 years, these suffragettes campaigned tirelessly. They organized parades, they held protests, they went on hunger strikes, they were arrested, ridiculed, and ostracized. Women like Susan B. Anthony became symbols of the movement, dedicating their entire lives to this single cause. Finally, in 1920, their persistence paid off. The 19th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified, granting American women the right to vote. It was a colossal victory. It was the moment women stepped out of the private sphere and into the public arena as citizens with political power. But the fight was far from over. Gaining the vote didn't magically erase centuries of social and economic inequality. After the whirlwind of the suffrage movement, things seemed to quiet down for a few decades. Women had the vote, and many returned to more traditional roles, especially after World War II, during the era of the suburban housewife. But beneath the surface, a different kind of discontent was simmering. This set the stage for the second wave. The 1960s arrived like a cultural tidal wave, and with it, the second wave of feminism exploded onto the scene. This wave was different. It wasn't just about legal rights, it was about everything else. The personal was political. The publication of Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, in 1963 was a spark that lit a wildfire. She wrote about the problem that has no name, the quiet unhappiness of millions of housewives who felt unfulfilled and trapped in their domestic roles despite having the perfect life. Women across the country read it and realized they weren't alone. They started forming consciousness-raising groups, sitting in circles in their living rooms, sharing stories, and realizing their personal problems were actually widespread political issues. They talked about everything: workplace discrimination, unequal pay, reproductive health, domestic responsibilities, and the very images of women in media. This wave was loud, activist-driven, and demanded sweeping changes. Activists, like Gloria Steinem, became national figures, co-founding Ms. Magazine, which became a voice for the movement. The National Organization for Women, or NOW, was formed to lobby for legislative change. They fought for and won incredible legal victories. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 was a landmark piece of legislation that aimed to abolish wage disparity based on sex. Then came the Civil Rights Act of 1964. While it's most known for combating racial discrimination, Title VII of the Act also prohibited employment discrimination on the basis of sex. This was huge. It meant employers could no longer legally refuse to hire a woman simply because she was a woman. But perhaps the most significant and controversial battle of the second wave was over reproductive rights. Before this, access to contraception was limited, and abortion was illegal in almost every state, forcing many women into dangerous, life-threatening situations. The movement argued that control over one's own body was a fundamental human right. This fight culminated in the landmark 1973 Supreme Court decision, Roe v. Wade, which established a woman's constitutional right to an abortion. This decision fundamentally redefined female autonomy. This era also saw the introduction of Title X in 1972, a law that prohibits sex-based discrimination in any school or education program that receives federal funding. Its most visible impact has been in sports, creating opportunities for millions of girls and women to play and compete. But its reach extends to all areas of education, ensuring equal access to academic and extracurricular activities. By the 1980s, the world looked very different for American women than it had just a few decades earlier. But as with the first wave, new challenges emerged, and the movement itself began to splinter and evolve. This led us into the third wave. Starting in the early 1990s, the third wave was born from a new generation that grew up with the victories of the second wave. They also saw its limitations. This wave was more inclusive and focused on intersectionality, the idea that systems of oppression are interconnected. They pointed out that the earlier waves had often centered on the experiences of white middle-class women, sometimes overlooking the unique struggles of women of color, queer women, and women from different socioeconomic backgrounds. This generation embraced individualism and redefined what being a feminist meant. They challenged rigid ideas about gender and sexuality. They used punk rock signs and art to express their ideas. Figures like Rebecca Walker, in her 1992 essay, famously declared, "I am the third wave." They tackled issues like sexual harassment in the workplace, which gained national attention during the Anita Hill hearings, and reclaimed language and stereotypes that had been used against women. This wave didn't have the same kind of single-issue focus as suffrage or the legal battles of the 60s and 70s. It was more diffuse, more personal, and deeply concerned with identity and culture. It laid the groundwork for the conversations we are having today. And that brings us to now what many call the fourth wave of feminism. This wave is digital. It's powered by social media. Hashtags like #MeToo and #TimesUp have exploded into global movements, exposing the staggering prevalence of sexual assault and harassment and holding powerful figures accountable in an unprecedented way. Fourth wave. Feminism is characterized by this online activism, a renewed focus on intersectionality, and a strong belief in body positivity and gender fluidity. It's about dismantling rape culture, advocating for equal representation in media and politics, and continuing the fight for equal pay. The 2017 Women's March, one of the largest single-day protests in US history, showed the immense power and energy of this modern movement. So, when we look back, we see a long, winding road. From the fight for a simple vote to the complex digital activism of today, the feminist movement has been a relentless force. It has fundamentally redefined what it means to be a woman in America. It secured our right to vote, to work, to get an education, to control our own bodies, and to be seen and heard in every corner of society. Of course, the journey is not over. The gender pay gap still exists. Women are still underrepresented in leadership roles. The fight over reproductive rights continues. But what's clear is that the spirit of those early radicals, of the second wave radicals, of the third wave individualists, and of today's digital activists lives on. Each generation has stood on the shoulders of the last, pushing the boundaries of freedom and equality just a little bit further. Thanks so much for watching. This is a huge topic, and we've only scratched the surface. What part of this history resonates most with you? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this video informative, please give it a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world. See you next time.